Have you ever wondered what happened to the women who fell in love with the fallen angels, beings who defied God's laws? Now, discover how their angelic husbands turned against heaven and how these brave but foolish women face terrible consequences. You will learn why the Nephilim, the giant children born from this forbidden union, were destroyed in a catastrophic flood, and how the Archangel Michael stepped in to take control. But the biggest shock? How he later punished those women. Stay with us to uncover how their souls transformed into sirens and why they still haunt our stories as terrifying figures today. You know, sometimes a single glance changes everything. This is the story of history's greatest and first love at first sight, one that went horribly wrong. Just imagine, up in heaven, the angels were doing their work, praising God and maintaining order in the world. Their only duty was to serve the Lord. Simple, right? But then, something unthinkable happened. These mighty angels began gazing down at earth, and what they saw made them pause. Human women, and not just any women. They were breathtakingly beautiful, unlike anything ever seen in heaven. This beauty was real, yet forbidden, because it was mortal. Here's where the story gets even more intriguing. These angels, who were meant to stay away from earthly desires, began feeling something strange, an irresistible pull they couldn't understand. Every time they looked down, the longing grew stronger. Their divine radiance dimmed as forbidden thoughts clouded their minds. Meanwhile, life on earth carried on as usual. Women worked, laughed, and loved, completely unaware that powerful angels above were breaking divine laws just to watch them. Yet, something unusual was happening to these women too. They began sensing unseen eyes upon them, as if they were special, as if something monumental was about to happen. The air felt charged, like the eerie calm before a storm. Fear and excitement mingled, as though the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The angels knew they were making a huge mistake. Every time they thought about leaving heaven, they were reminded of their true purpose. They were servants of God, warriors of heaven. But despite this, they couldn't suppress the pulling feeling inside them. That feeling grew stronger with each passing day. They began to ask themselves questions they had never dared to ask before. Can we feel like humans? Can we love like them? The hearts of those angels, created solely to love and serve God, were now overwhelmed with desires they couldn't control. Day by day, more and more angels started turning their gaze toward earth. With each glance, their resolve weakened. They faced a monumental decision: to remain faithful to their divine calling or surrender to these new, unfamiliar emotions. Everything was on the verge of changing. Heaven and earth were never meant to connect in this way. Yet these angels, who once stood beside God and witnessed the creation of stars, were now willing to leave it all behind. For what? For a single chance to experience human love. No one knew that this decision would set off a chain of events powerful enough to shake both heaven and earth. These angels were about to learn a hard lesson, that some rules are not meant to be broken, no matter how tempting the reason may seem. When the angels descended to earth, it was like magic, but not the good kind. Imagine the most beautiful human you've ever seen, then multiply that image 1,000 times. That's how these fallen angels appeared. They didn't just walk, they glided as if floating in the air. Their voices didn't just speak, they sounded like music. Light seemed to dance around them, making everything else look dull and lifeless in comparison. As they entered villages and towns, everyone stopped in awe. How could they not? It was like looking at the sun, painful yet impossible to turn away. The women who saw them felt something they had never experienced before. It wasn't just attraction or desire. It felt as though they were under a spell. These weren't just handsome strangers passing through. They seemed perfect in every way. Their skin glowed like moonlight. In their eyes were all the stars of heaven, and when they smiled, that's when the real trouble began. You know how they say, if something feels too good to be true, it probably is. That's exactly what was happening here. These weren't just super handsome men. They were angels who had left heaven. And if you looked closely, you could feel that something was off. Their smiles held secrets deeper than the night, and their beautiful eyes, they weren't just deep, they were ancient, in a way no human eyes could ever be. The women who met them were drawn in like moths to a flame, and it truly wasn't a good thing. How could you say no to someone who glowed with heavenly light? Someone who knew everything about you before even speaking a word. Someone who could promise things no human could ever fulfill? But here's where it became terrifying. The longer these women stayed with the fallen angels, the more they began to change, as if they had absorbed some of that otherworldly glow. They started seeing things differently. Normal life no longer felt the same. Ordinary men seemed dull and boring compared to these heavenly beings. The fallen angels knew exactly what they were doing. They chose the most beautiful women, the ones who had caught their attention even from heaven, and using their divine powers, they made themselves into the very image of those women's dreams. It was like a fairy tale romance, but with a dark twist. Because every time one of these angels took a human wife, it shook both heaven and earth. These weren't ordinary marriages. These were unions that were never meant to exist. And the children born from these forbidden relationships. That's where the story takes an even darker turn. Let me tell you about the children of these forbidden marriages, the Nephilim. Imagine a child being born, but instead of staying small and adorable, they just kept growing and growing. These were no ordinary children. These were giants, beings with the strength to shake mountains and the hunger to devour entire villages. When a Nephilim walked, the ground would tremble. When they spoke, their voices sounded like thunder. They were born with the power of their angel fathers and the emotions of their human mothers, but had no understanding of how to control either. Imagine the rage of a small child. Now imagine that child the size of a house. Terrifying, isn't it? The cities were terrified of these giants. Ordinary people stood no chance against them. The Nephilim took whatever they wanted, ate whatever they pleased, and destroyed anything that came in their path. Some of them were as tall as trees, some even taller. But they weren't just big, they were intelligent, and that made them even more dangerous. In heaven, God was watching all of this. His entire creation was turning upside down. These hybrid beings, who were never meant to exist, had been born. His anger grew day by day as he saw these giants terrorizing the humans he so dearly loved. Humans who once walked freely now lived in fear, hiding in their homes and crying out for help. That's when the greatest warriors of heaven, the Archangels, realized they had to intervene. But even for them, this wasn't going to be easy. Fighting the Nephilim was like fighting pure power itself. They were nearly indestructible, and there were too many of them. The Archangels gathered their armies, knowing this would be their greatest battle yet. Michael, Gabriel, and the others formed a plan. They couldn't just charge in. They weren't fighting ordinary monsters. These were beings with angelic blood in their veins. But when God is on your side, your plans are greater than anything else. When the Archangels realized they might not be enough to stop the Nephilim, God himself decided to intervene. He had a plan, one that would change the world forever. A flood, a great flood, that would wash away every trace of evil spreading across the earth. What followed was a war the world had never seen before, the armies of heaven clashing with the mighty Nephilim, and the greatest flood in history descending upon the earth. Thunder cracked across the sky. Mountains trembled with the roar, and the rain began to fall. For the first time ever, the Nephilim felt something they had never known: fear. It was becoming clear to everyone, angels, humans, and Nephilim alike, that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. But before we go on, have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, go ahead and do it now. Have you ever seen storm clouds so dark that it feels like night during the day? That's exactly what happened. When God declared no more, the sky didn't just darken, it turned ink black. The air grew so heavy that breathing became difficult. At first, people didn't think much of it. Rain is normal, right? But this was different. The raindrops were thick and heavy, like heaven itself was crying. The rain didn't just fall, it slammed down like the sky was breaking apart. Hour after hour, day after day, the rain just kept coming. No pause, no break, just relentless water pouring from an angry sky. The mighty Nephilim, who had once terrified all, now looked afraid. These giants, who could break stones with their hands, were helpless against the rising flood. They tried to climb the highest mountains, but even there, the waters kept rising. Their strength no longer mattered. Nature itself had turned against them. Screams echoed across the land. People were crying out for mercy, pleading for help, calling to heaven. The fallen angels looked on helplessly as their children, the powerful beings they had created, struggled against the flood. But they could do nothing. This was God's judgment, and no force in heaven or on earth could stop it. And in the midst of all this chaos, one ark floated safely, Noah's Ark. Imagine being on that boat, hearing the storm rage outside, the waves tossing you like a toy. Inside were the humans and animals who would survive this global cleansing. They could hear the cries of the dying outside, but they couldn't help them. This was God's plan, and they had to trust it. The waters kept rising. First, they covered the fields, then the forests, then the hills, Even the tallest mountains vanished beneath the endless waves. The Nephilim, once mighty and invincible giants, were now just another thing swept away by the flood. Their immense strength could not save them from drowning. The fallen angels could only watch from their chains as everything they had created, everyone they had loved, disappeared beneath the waters. Their perfect children, their human wives, the cities they had helped build, everything was gone. The world they had corrupted was now being cleansed. For 40 days and 40 nights, water poured from the heavens. When it finally stopped, the entire earth had become one vast ocean. There were no mountains, no valleys, no cities, just water, stretching as far as the eye could see. The only sign of life was Noah's Ark, floating alone in that endless sea. As the water slowly began to recede, a completely new world emerged. Everything created by the Nephilim had been washed away. It was as if someone had pressed a giant reset button on earth. But for some, especially the wives of the fallen angels, a far worse punishment was only just beginning. You might think that when the flood ended, the worst was over. But for them, it was just the beginning. Remember those women who had fallen in love with the fallen angels? They had survived the flood, but perhaps they were never meant to. Imagine loving someone completely, someone perfect, powerful, and then watching them being dragged away in chains. That's what happened to these women. Their angelic husbands, once radiant and strong, were now imprisoned, some in dark pits, bound in chains, others in spiritual prisons, cut off from the world. Now, they could no longer protect their wives, nor reach for them. The women were left behind, alone, to face the consequences of their choices. Some were completely shattered. Imagine realizing that your decisions helped bring about the end of the world. That's a burden too heavy for any soul to carry. They fell to their knees, weeping, begging God for forgiveness until there were no tears left, but not all repented. Take Naamah, for example. Beautiful, proud Naamah. Even after everything, she refused to surrender. She was intoxicated by her beauty and power, using them to lead others down the wrong path. She still stood tall, too proud to admit she was wrong. Her pride became her prison, and God's punishment subtle and cruel. These women were transformed into sirens, creatures who lured sailors to their doom. Yes, those sirens. Beautiful, but deadly, just like the angels they had once loved. They became beings that pulled others into destruction, just as they had once been pulled. The mental torment was worse than anything physical. These women had to live with unbearable regret, knowing their love, their choices, helped destroy the world. Some went mad from the guilt. Others became unrecognizable, no longer able to bear the weight of what they had done. Their angelic husbands, bound in their dark prisons, could still feel their wives' pain, their despair, their madness, but they could do nothing. That was a punishment worse than death. As for the angels who had remained faithful to God, they were given a new mission: to watch over this changed world, to ensure that such a thing could never happen again. They watched the sirens who had once been their sisters singing their dangerous songs across the waters. They watched humanity slowly rebuild, trying to forget the terror of the flood. It was a new chapter for everyone. The world had been cleansed, but the scars remained. The loyal angels now watched from afar. They saw, but they never interfered. They had learned their lesson. Some boundaries were never meant to be crossed.